Ladies and gentlemen, when you're around negative people, it's easy to feel like you have to match their tone to be heard. Maybe they're passive-aggressive, sarcastic, always complaining, or constantly bringing the mood down. And the moment they start pressing your buttons, your body wants to go on defense. That's natural. But here's the thing. Responding with bitterness doesn't protect you. It connects you to their chaos. You become part of the energy you were trying to avoid. That's where boundaries come in. Not as walls to shut people out, but as filters that decide what gets to you and what doesn't. A boundary says, I see how you're showing up, but I choose how I respond. It's the difference between absorbing negativity and observing it. You're allowed to acknowledge someone's behavior without making it your responsibility. When someone speaks to you in a toxic tone, you don't have to mirror it back. You don't have to roll your eyes, get sarcastic, or one-up their energy. That might feel good for a second, but it never solves anything. It just prolongs the dysfunction. Boundaries are internal first. They start with you reminding yourself of your values, your tone, your self-control. So when someone brings heat, you don't have to bring fire. You can bring clarity. You can say calmly, that doesn't work for me, or I'm not going to continue this conversation if it keeps going that direction. You're not trying to fix them. You're not trying to change their mood. You're just showing them how they can interact with you if they want to keep access to your space. That's the power of boundaries. They're about standards, not punishment. And no, boundaries don't mean you're cold or distant. They mean you're aware of your limits. They mean you've stopped confusing people-pleasing with peacekeeping. You've stopped accepting disrespect just because it's coming from someone you know, love, or work with. You've learned that silence in the face of mistreatment isn't grace. It's self-erasure. So instead, you speak up, not with bitterness, but with balance. Not to fight, but to make it clear. This is the line. Negative people often test those lines. They want to see how far they can push you before you snap, or fold, or explode. They thrive on reaction. That's why bitterness gives them what they want. But boundaries confuse them. Boundaries make them rethink their approach. And sometimes they leave. Not because you were rude or aggressive, but because you're calm, didn't feed their storm. If you want peace in your space, you have to enforce it. That doesn't mean being loud. That means being consistent. Every time you respond from a place of calm strength, you reinforce what you stand for. Every time you stay grounded instead of reactive, you teach people how to treat you. It's not a one-time thing. Boundaries are a lifestyle, not a moment. They show up in the tone you choose, the energy you protect, and the exits you take when conversations stop being respectful. When you're face-to-face with someone who drains your energy, someone who triggers that deep internal frustration, your body often reacts before your brain gets a chance to weigh in. Your heart races, your muscles tense, words rush to your mouth that you wouldn't normally say. That's what happens when emotion gets behind the wheel and logic takes a back seat. And in those moments, you're not thinking clearly, you're reacting. That's when we say things we regret, agree to things we don't mean, or get pulled into arguments that go nowhere. It's not because we're weak, it's because we're human. But if you're not careful, that emotional charge will cost you your peace, your clarity, and sometimes your self-respect. There's a moment in every difficult interaction where a choice opens up. Do you let your emotions carry you, or do you take a breath and ground yourself in logic? Logic doesn't mean being cold. It doesn't mean suppressing how you feel. It means slowing down the reaction long enough to check in with what's actually happening. What's the outcome you want from this conversation? Is the argument worth it? Are you responding to what's in front of you, or to a pattern you've carried for years? Those are logical questions that emotion usually doesn't have time for. Emotion says they disrespected me and I need to clap back. Logic says their tone doesn't define me, and I choose how I handle this. When someone negative is pressing all the wrong buttons, their goal, whether they realize it or not, is often to pull you out of your center. Misery wants company, and when you match their negativity, you give them exactly what they want. You've lost your footing, and now you're on their ground, playing by their rules. But when you respond with composure, you stay rooted in your own standards. That's how you keep control of the conversation. And more importantly, yourself. Training your mind to pause before reacting isn't easy. It takes practice. It takes a conscious decision to not let the heat of the moment override your values. You might feel like saying something sharp. You might want to slam the door, raise your voice, prove a point. But logic reminds you that protecting your peace is often more powerful than winning an argument. It reminds you that not every comment needs a comeback, and not every insult deserves your energy. When you keep your emotions in check, you gain clarity on who someone really is. You see their patterns without being clouded by your own reactivity. You get to make informed decisions about who stays in your life, what behaviors you will no longer entertain, and what boundaries need to be put in place. Logic gives you the long view. It helps you navigate short-term discomfort for long-term stability. It's the inner calm that allows you to exit gracefully, instead of exploding unnecessarily. It's the voice inside that says you're not obligated to respond to every provocation. It keeps you aligned with your values, instead of pulled into someone else's dysfunction. Your energy is one of the most valuable things you have. It's not unlimited, and once it's spent, you don't just get it back by snapping your fingers. It takes time to reach, and it gets drained fast when you're constantly surrounded by negativity, chaos, or people who thrive on taking more than they give. Yet most people treat their energy like it's disposable, like it's something they can give out freely without consequence. The truth is, the people who protect their energy like it's currency, those are the ones who keep their peace, their focus and their strength intact. Every time you engage with someone who drains you, you're spending energy. Every time you enter a conversation just to keep the peace, agree to something you don't want, or allow someone's mood to dictate yours, you're making a withdrawal. And just like money, if you keep withdrawing without ever depositing, you go into emotional debt. That's when the burnout kicks in. That's when you feel exhausted for no reason, snappy over small things, or numb around people you used to care about. It doesn't mean you've changed. It means you've been overspending on people who don't invest back. There's a major difference between being available and being accessible. You can be kind without being constantly reachable. You can be compassionate without letting everyone in. People who protect their energy aren't selfish. They're strategic. They understand that their emotional bandwidth is limited, and they're careful about where it goes. They don't chase closure in conversations that always end the same way. They don't argue with people committed to misunderstanding them. They don't keep giving second chances to patterns that never change. That kind of discernment isn't cold, it's wise. You also have to be honest about the things that drain you. Maybe it's that one friend who always turns every conversation into a crisis. Maybe it's the coworker who gossips all day. Maybe it's the relative who only reaches out when they need something. These people might not be intentionally toxic, but the impact is the same. They chip away at your mental space. Protecting your energy means recognizing these patterns and adjusting accordingly. It means setting limits on how long you engage, how deep you get involved, and how often you say yes out of guilt instead of choice. Boundaries are the tools you use to manage your energy, and those boundaries don't always need to be explained or defended. Sometimes it's just a quieter presence, a delayed response, a skipped call, a shorter visit. It's not about being rude, it's about being responsible for your own emotional well-being. The people who truly respect you won't resent your boundaries, they'll understand them. And the ones who push back, they're the reason you needed the boundaries in the first place. Energy protection also means checking in with yourself regularly, asking where your time and attention are going, noticing which conversations leave you feeling lighter, and which ones leave you depleted. It means being intentional about what you consume, who you spend time with, and where you focus your attention. Because just like money, if you don't track how it's spent, you'll always be wondering where it all went. There's a quiet kind of power in realizing you don't owe everyone an explanation. So many people stay stuck in toxic conversations, draining friendships, or uncomfortable environments, because they feel obligated to explain why they're leaving. But the truth is, your peace doesn't need permission, and your decisions don't need to be justified to everyone who questions them. There comes a point when staying becomes more exhausting than leaving, and the most respectful thing you can do for yourself, and sometimes for them, is to exit. You can walk away from a conversation that's going nowhere. You can remove yourself from a room when the energy shifts and you feel your spirit start to tighten. You can stop replying to the person who only reaches out to argue, control, or criticize. Not because you're running away, not because you're scared of conflict, but because you've learned that your presence is not a reward for bad behavior. You're allowed to choose distance over dysfunction. Often the pressure to explain ourselves comes from a fear of being misunderstood. We want people to know we're not being rude, or selfish, or dramatic, but that desire for clarity can keep us tangled in conversations that aren't worth having. If someone is committed to misinterpreting your boundaries, no amount of explaining will change that. Some people don't want understand, they want access. And when you deny them that access, they push back, not because they're confused, but because they're entitled. Choosing to leave without explanation isn't the same as ghosting or being careless with people's feelings. It's about discernment. It's about recognizing when continuing the conversation would only lead to more conflict, more confusion, more of the same cycle you've already tried to break. It's knowing when your silence is healthier than your defense. It's choosing to conserve your energy instead of spilling it for someone who isn't ready to receive it with care. You don't have to text back just to prove you're polite. You don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. You don't have to sit through a conversation that disrespects your boundaries just because the other person is used to you tolerating it. Leaving doesn't always mean slamming doors or making announcements. Sometimes it's a quiet shift, a step back, less engagement, a softer tone, a decision made not explained. There's a maturity in knowing when to exit, and there's strength in doing it without drama. It's easy to make a scene, to send the long message to break things on the way out. What's harder and far more powerful is leaving with grace. No fanfare, no justification, just the self-trust that says, I know this isn't good for me, and that's reason enough. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is remove yourself from the equation before it turns into something that costs you your peace, your energy, or your integrity. When you've done the work to be self-aware, you stop needing everyone to co-sign your choice. You stop waiting for validation that may never come. You stop trying to manage other people's reactions to your growth. You simply choose yourself, and you let that be the full sentence. Not everything someone throws your way needs to be caught. But when you're around negative people, especially those who carry their stress, anger, or insecurity like a shield, it can feel like you're expected to hold it all. Their sarcasm, their dismissive tone, the way they criticize or complain, it all comes out. And before you know it, you're internalizing it. You start to question yourself, feel tense, or even respond with your own irritation. That's what happens when you absorb someone else's projection. Their storm becomes your atmosphere. But here's what's true. You are not a container for their unprocessed emotions. People project for different reasons. Sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's not. Maybe they're having a bad day and haven't learned how to regulate themselves. Maybe they feel small, so they try to make others feel small. Maybe they grew up thinking the only way to connect was through criticism or control. Whatever the reason, their projection isn't about you. It's about what's happening inside them. The moment you start to see it that way, you create space between their behavior and your identity. You start to recognize just because someone's words are loud doesn't mean they're true. Just because they act with authority doesn't mean they're right. The mistake many people make is taking on someone else's emotions as if it's a responsibility. You feel someone's tension and think it's your job to fix it. You hear their negativity and feel like you have to match their mood to stay connected. But what that does is rob you of your emotional clarity. You start carrying weight that was never yours in the first place. And over time, that constant absorption becomes a pattern, one that leaves you drained, resentful, and disconnected from your own needs. You can witness someone's anger without reacting to it. You can hear the criticism and still know who you are. That ability to separate your identity from their emotion is what keeps you grounded. It's what helps you respond instead of react. And responding doesn't always mean engaging. Sometimes it's choosing not to take the bait. Sometimes it's silence, a pause, a breath, a reminder to yourself that you are not the emotional dumping ground for anyone who hasn't done the work to deal with their own inner world. It takes strength to stay open-hearted and still not take things personally, to listen without absorbing, to care without carrying. That's emotional discipline, and it starts with how you talk to yourself. When someone lashes out or gets passive-aggressive, or throws blame your way, what's the story you're telling yourself in that moment? Is it that you did something wrong, that you're responsible for fixing it? Or is it the truth that what they're projecting has more to do with their unspoken pain than anything about you? Once you shift that story, everything changes. You stop bending yourself into shapes that don't fit just to keep the peace. You stop explaining yourself to people who aren't trying to understand. You stop overfunctioning in conversations where you're the only one showing up with emotional responsibility. You begin to take your power back, not by fighting, but by refusing to receive what was never yours to hold. You let their energy stay with them, and you keep your clarity intact.